Namaste, aloha. My name is Janapati Das, and we are going to read from the Krishna book again today. So, welcome. Please accept my respects. Let me offer my respects to my spiritual teacher and to Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And let me remind you, if you have not subscribed to this channel of mine, please do so. Also, feel free to make comments, ask questions in the comment section. Please share on other pages and with other people. We want to be able to up the algorithm so that more people can see these stories, listen to the wonderful stories, and be benefited spiritually. Right now we're going to go ahead and engage in the kirtan, hearing and chanting of Krishna's names. So please join along. Jai Gurudev. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Sirasarabhakanda Paramahamsa Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Siraswarupananda Paramahamsa Iti Namine Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Haribol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So welcome, and we are back in it with the story of Rukmini. And we've been reading about Princess Rukmini, right? Who is the god, non different than the goddess of fortune, the expansion of Radharani. She was kidnapped by Krishna, of course, and then there was a great battle that ensued. And of course, the Yadu dynasty broke the ranks of all of Rukmini's forces, and Rukmini, all of his allies like Jarasandha and even Shishapala was not fighting. He lost his wife, but he was like not fighting. But Rukmini took a fight with Krishna, and of course could not defeat Krishna, and Krishna was going to kill Rukmini, but Rukmini pleaded on his behalf, and so Krishna decided to teach him a lesson by cutting up his beard and his mustache, and it was pretty funny looking, and of course it was probably humiliating for Rukmini. As we can see, that's a little bit of foreshadowing that will happen in another Krishna story with Rukmini. And Balaram came in and was sort of instructing Rukmini and telling Krishna, hey, why did you do this? You know, you shouldn't really do that to, he's our, brother-in-law, and telling Rukmini that the opposite, like he was actually being very sinful, and he deserved to make himself look funny because, anyway, so in that way Balaram was able to create a sort of equilibrium in the situation and give us some wonderful instructions. If you haven't heard that, you can go back to the last video and listen to that part of the story. Right now we are continuing on that story. After defeating all the opposing elements and forcibly carrying away Rukmini, Krishna brought her to his capital city Dwarka and then married her according to the Vedic ritualistic principle. After this marriage, Krishna became the king of the Yadus at Dwarka. On the occasion of his marriage with Rukmini, all the inhabitants were happy, and in every house there were great ceremonies. The inhabitants of Dwarka city became so pleased that they dressed themselves with the nicest possible ornaments and garments, and they went to present gifts according to their means to the newly married couple, Krishna and Rukmini. All the houses of Yadupuri, Dwarka, were decorated with flags, festoons, and flowers. Each and every house had an extra gate specifically prepared for this occasion, and on both sides of the gate there were big water jugs filled with water. The whole city was flavored by the burning of high-quality incense, and at night there was illumination by thousands of lamps decorating each and every building. The entire city appeared jubilant on the occasion of Lord Krishna's marriage with Rukmini. Everywhere in the city there was profuse decorations of banana trees and betel nut trees. These two trees are considered very auspicious in happy ceremonies. At the same time, there was an assembly of many elephants who carried the respective kings of different friendly kingdoms. It is the habit of the elephant that whenever he sees some small plants and trees, out of his sportive, frivolous nature, he uproots the trees and throws them hither and thither. The elephant assembled on this occasion and also scattered the banana and betel nut trees, but in spite of such intoxicated action, the whole city, with the trees thrown here and there, looked very nice. The friendly kings of the Kurus and the Pandavas were represented by Dhritarashtra, the 5 Pandu brothers, King Drupada, King Santardhan, as well as Rukmini's father Bhishmaka. So here there's sort of an intersection of the Mahabharata, right? In this story, of course, the Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear of the Kuru dynasty, which included Arjuna and the Pandava brothers, right? Yudhishthira, Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, and Sahadev. There was Dhritarashtra, the blind king, right, who was the brother of Pandu. King Drupada, which is a very interesting story also, who was the father of Queen Drupadi, who was the wife of the five Pandava brothers. And that was a very interesting story because in that time, day and age, and even today, it's very unlikely that one woman would be married to five men. It was quite common for men to have many wives, but in the case of this, it was very unlikely, unusual. But it was, the story behind it was that when Drupadi, the queen, the princess, who was actually being sought out by Arjuna, right? And she knew that she wanted to be, and King Drupada was also very interested in having Arjuna be Drupadi's husband. So he actually set up a competition for the princes because he knew by the etiquette he had to have some kind of, means by which his daughter would be married off, right? So in this case, what happened was that he set up something he knew that only Arjuna could do, and that was basically he would have to use a mirror to shoot an arrow behind his back and shoot or it was like water or something, some kind of reflection, right? To shoot an arrow through an eye of a fish that was suspended far away. So everyone, first of all, the bow was very difficult to handle, so even some princes couldn't even handle the bow, let alone. But Arjuna was such an amazing warrior and a handler of the bow. He was the master of it. That of course King Drupada knew that only he would be able to do that. So, anyways, of course he shot the fish and he was going to marry Drupadi, and Queen Kunti, the mother, Arjuna went to go say, I've gotten something I want to show you, basically his wife, right? And she said, well, that's great, but make sure you share it with your brothers. And so in that time, the Vedic, the parents were considered almost like their spiritual masters, because even the mother, the request instructions of the mothers and the fathers were to be held in high esteem, that if they asked for something that you would have to keep it. So then she showed, oh, this was Drupadi, my wife, and she had said, Queen Kunti had said, you have to share it with your brothers. So all five Pandava brothers were expected to marry, and it was actually Krishna's arrangement that Drupadi would be married by all these Pandava brothers, because they were non-envious of each other. They loved each other, and I think what happened was they were like, oh my gosh, what was that? Even King Drupada was like, how could this be? Five men could have one wife. That's just like sinful, in most cases in the Vedic civilization. But all the great saints like Vyasadeva, and they came and they explained how it was saintly and acceptable in the Vedic system, and they used a lot of examples of many cases of great saints and great kings who had done similar things. So anyway, so that was that story. So King Drupada, sort of a side story of that. There's a lot of wonderful in stories, and when you read the Mahabharata, it's got so many connections that when you start explaining it, you have to go back many stories to explain other stories. So it's a very wonderful epic. So, and then it was Rukmini. Okay, because of Krishna's kidnapping Rukmini, there was initially some misunderstanding between the two families, but Bhishmaka, king of Vidarbha, being approached by Sri Balaram and persuaded by many saintly persons, was induced to participate in the marriage ceremony of Krishna and Rukmini. So Bhishmaka he did want Krishna to be married, but because there was this weird situation where there was a big battle and Krishna had come and stolen, he was like, well, what's going on here? But the Supreme Lord, personality of Godhead, Sri Balaram, came and explained, as well as many saintly persons. So here's the situation again, like some kind of situation happens, just like the other case where Jyopada was like, how's this work out? You know, suddenly all these saintly people like Narada and Vyasadeva, they'll all show up and they'll explain it by how it applies in a spiritual sense. And in that time, in the Vedic time, that's how you did it. You know, the kings were elevated to rule the kingdom, but they were guided by saintly people, by the Brahmanas, and also by great saints and great sages. So this was all explained why it was, why it was acceptable, right? Although the incident of Krishna's kidnapping was not a very happy occurrence in the kingdom of Vidarbha, kidnapping was not an unusual affair among the Kshatriyas. Kidnapping was in fact current in almost all marriages. Anyway, King Bhishmaka was from the very beginning inclined to hand over his beautiful daughter to Krishna. So there we go. He already kind of wanted it, but he knew that his son didn't want it. And there were probably a lot of people in there that were salty about it, as we'll see in future stories, actually. Okay, so in one way or another, his purpose had been served, and so he was pleased to join the marriage ceremony, even though his eldest son was degraded in the fight. And so that's very typical of kings. You know, they get attached to their sons, like we've seen with Dhritarashtra and his sons, and many other king's sons. They get kind of caught up in the materialistic way of life, being a king. They have a lot of sense gratification being a king, so they tend to be not completely clear-headed about this. And this is a point that, you know, a lot of people, Krishna was the supreme person. He's a supreme personality of Godhead, and he appeared on the planet. Many people saw him, but they didn't actually see him. You know, they just thought he was this person and this prince and this cowherd boy. They didn't, only the dear devotees of Krishna could actually see him with their heart spiritually, to understand who he really was. So even King Bhishmaka didn't really have a clear understanding of who Krishna really was. It is mentioned in the Padma Purana that Maharaj Nanda and the cowherd boys of Vrindavan joined the marriage ceremony. Kings from the kingdom of Kuru, Srinjaya, Kekaya, Vidarbha, and Kunti came to Dwarka on this occasion with all their royal paraphernalia. The story of Rukmini's being kidnapped was poeticized, and the professional readers recited it everywhere. All the assembled kings, and especially their daughters, were struck with wonder and became very pleased upon hearing the chivalrous activities of Krishna. So this is a very common thing. The Puranas, or the histories, they're also considered scriptures, right? The Puranas talk about the great histories of the Vedic civilization. And oftentimes in these settings, they would have these professional performers who would write great poems about the great kings and the great saints of the past, and tell them for everybody to enjoy. This is a very common tradition of the Vedic civilization. Unfortunately, a lot of modern India, the modernizing of India is sort of pulled away from a lot of these kinds of things, unfortunately. Kings from the, okay, so we said, all the assembled kings, and especially their daughters, were struck with wonder and became very pleased upon hearing the chivalrous activities of Krishna. In this way, all visitors as well as the inhabitants of Dwarka city became joyful, seeing Krishna and Rukmini together. In other words, the Supreme Lord, the maintainer of everyone, and the goddess of fortune were united, and all the people felt extremely jubilant. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 53rd chapter of Krishna. Krishna defeats all the princes and takes Rukmini home to Dwarka. Okay, chapter 54, Pradyumna, born to Krishna and Rukmini. So we're moving into the latter part of the Krishna book here, as Krishna's children and grandchildren, so-called children and grandchildren, right, are born, and some other latter stories of the Krishna book in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They're very wonderful. It is said that Cupid, who is directly part and parcel of Lord Vasudeva, and who was formerly burned to ashes by the anger of Lord Shiva, took birth in the womb of Rukmini, begotten by Krishna. This is Kamadev, a demigod of the heavenly planets, especially capable of inducing lusty desires. So we have this, idea of Cupid, right? We often think of Cupid in the West as kind of like this little angelic-like creature, nymph kind of thing with the bow and arrow, and goes around shooting people and making them. And it is actually a real demigod. And it's said that Krishna, Madana Mohana, right? Madana Mohana. Krishna is the attractor of Cupid. So Cupid is actually the one who attracts mortals to engage in lusty desires or be attracted towards each other physically. But even Cupid, who's so powerful, the demigod, is attracted by the beauty of Krishna. And then, of course, we have Madana Mohana Mohini, right? Madana Mohana Mohini, who is Rukmini. So Rukmini is the attractor of Cupid. So powerful that the goddess of fortune, the Rukmini Devi and Radharani are so attractive that they are actually, that even Krishna is attracted to them. So very wonderful. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, has many grades of parts and parcels, but the quadruple expansions of Krishna, Vasudeva, Shankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, are directly in the Vishnu category. Kama, or the Cupid demigod, who later on took his birth in the womb of Rukmini, was also named Pradyumna, but he cannot be the Pradyumna of the Vishnu category. That's an important point. So you actually will see there are sons that are named after this expansions of Krishna, Vishnu forms, but they're not the same as these expansions. Kama, or the Cupid demigod, who later on took the birth in the womb of Rukmini, was also named Pradyumna, but he cannot be the Pradyumna of the Vishnu category. He belongs to the category of Jiva Tattva, but for special power in the category of demigods, he was a part and parcel of the super prowess of Pradyumna. That is the verdict of the Goswamis. Therefore, when Cupid was burned into ashes by the anger of Lord Shiva, he merged into the body of Vasudeva, and in order to get his body again, he was begotten by Lord Krishna himself. He was directly released from his body in the womb of Rukmini and was born as the son of Krishna, celebrated by the name Pradyumna. Because he was begotten by Lord Krishna directly, his qualities were most similar to those of Krishna. There was a demon of the name Shambhara who was destined to be killed by this Pradyumna. The Shambhara demon knew of his destiny, and as soon as he learned that Pradyumna was born, he took the shape of a woman and kidnapped the baby from the maternity home less than 10 days after his birth. The demon took him and threw him directly into the sea, but as it is said, whoever is protected by Krishna, no one can kill, and whoever is destined to be killed by Krishna, no one can protect. When Pradyumna was thrown into the sea, a big fish immediately swallowed him. Later on, this fish was caught by the net of a fisherman, and the fish was later on sold to the Shambhara demon. In the kitchen of the demon, there was a maidservant whose name was Mayavati. This woman had formerly been the wife of Cupid and had been called Rati. When the fish was presented to the demon Shambhara and was taken charge of by his cook, who was to make it a palatable fish preparation. Demons and the Rakshasas are accustomed to eat meat, fish, and similar non-vegetarian foods. Similarly, other demons like Ravana, Kamsa, and Hiranyakashipu, although born of Brahmana and Kshatriya's fathers, used to take meat and flesh without discrimination. So it does take a little bit of a demoniac kind of attitude to be eating the bodies of other living entities, like who have central nervous systems and can feel pain. And the practice of slaughterhouses in modern society is very demoniac. All one has to do is actually take a look at some of the videos of how animals are treated, and these are and Krishna does not condone this, because Krishna is a lover of cows, right? He's also said that he does not accept meat, fish, or eggs in his offering. So it's actually verily, as it says, you're verily only eating sin, if you don't offer the proper foods to Krishna. And meat, And fish and other things like eggs are not acceptable for Krishna, so they never should be offered to Krishna, and they never should be consumed. We can offer milk products, because milk is, even though these day and age is kind of like Western society is a lot of like hormones and milk and whatnot, but it's Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada said that milk has the qualities to be able to develop the fine, subtle tissues in the brain for spiritual realization. And so it's a very good thing to offer. Similarly, other demon, so we said this practice is still prevalent in India, and those who are meat and fish eaters are generally called demons and rakshasas. Pretty heavy. So, there's a lot of meat consumption in the world, and in the Western society, a lot of people eat meat. A lot more people than it used to be, even though it's very, you would think, well, there's actually a lot more fake meats and whatnot nowadays, and more vegetarians and more vegans, but actually there's more meat production. Even these societies like in Southeast Asia that had typically like a typical like vegetarian diet, or maybe very little bit of fish or meat, they're being introduced to the Western fast food, so there's a lot more meat now eaten. So McDonald's and these KFCs, they're popping up all over the place where they didn't exist before. So the meat consumption is actually increasing as Kali Yuga progresses, and this causes a lot of suffering for not only these living entities who are in the bodies of these animals, but karmically for everybody and for all society. It's a very demoniac practice to actually, and there are a lot of like materialistic proof that why eating meat is very bad for you and it's bad for the environment and whatnot, but on a spiritual level it's actually quite sinful, and karmically it's bad news for you if you're engaging in it. When the cook was cutting the fish, he found a nice baby within the belly of the fish, and he immediately presented him to the charge of Mayavati, who was the assistant in the kitchen affairs. This woman was surprised to see how such a nice baby could remain within the belly of a fish, and the situation perplexed her. The great sage Narada then appeared. Narada Muni, he's the great spaceman, right? The story of Narada Muni is very, very wonderful. If you've ever heard of, maybe another time I'll do a class on Narada Muni and how he came to be such a great saint. And he travels the three worlds and the spiritual world with his Veena that was given to him by Krishna, and chants the glories of Krishna's name, and instructs people on spiritual life. And he, as we've seen already, he's appeared quite a few times already in the story, and now he's appearing here to explain to this woman, Mayavati, about who this great personality is, who this baby is. So he explained to her about the birth of Pradyumna, how the baby had been taken away by Shamba and later on thrown into the sea, and so on. In this way, the whole story was disclosed to Mayavati, who had formerly been Rati, the wife of Cupid. Mayavati knew that she had previously been the wife of Cupid. After her husband was burnt into ashes by the wrath of Lord Shiva, she was always expecting him to come back again in the material form. This woman was engaged for cooking rice and dal in the kitchen, but when she got this nice baby and understood that he was Cupid, her own husband, she naturally took charge of him and with great affection began to bathe him. Miraculously, the baby very swiftly grew up, and within a very short period he became a very beautiful young man. His eyes were just like the petals of lotus flowers. His arms were very long down to the knees, and any woman who happened to see him became captivated by his bodily beauty. So the children of Krishna had the same kind of bodily features as Krishna, so they were very beautiful. Mayavati could understand that her former husband, Cupid, born as Pradyumna, had grown into such a nice young man, and she also gradually became captivated and lusty. She was smiling before him with a feminine attractiveness, expressing her desire for sexual unity. He therefore inquired from her, "How is it possible that first of all you were affectionate like a mother, and now you are expressing the symptoms of a lusty woman? What is the reason for such a change?" So he doesn't really know, he isn't aware of this. he's like, oh, you were first taking care of me like a mother, and now you're like, attracted to me sexually. On hearing this statement from Pradyumna, the woman Rati replied, my dear sir, you are the son of Lord Krishna. Before you were 10 days old, you were stolen by the Shambhara demon, and later on thrown into the water and swallowed up by a fish. In this way you have come under my care, but actually in your former life as Cupid, I was your wife. Therefore my manifestation of conjugal symptoms is not at all incompatible. Shambhara wanted to kill you, and he is endowed with various kinds of mystic powers. Therefore, before he again attempts to kill you, please kill him as soon as possible with your divine power. Since you were stolen by Shambhara, your mother, Rukmini Devi, has been in a very grievous condition, like a cuckoo bird who has lost her babies. She is very affectionate toward you, and since you have been taken away from her, she has been living like a cow, aggrieved over the loss of its calf. Mayavati had a mystic knowledge of supernatural powers. Supernatural powers are generally known as Maya, and to supersede all such supernatural power, there is another supernatural power which is called Mahamaya. Mayavati had the knowledge of the mystic power of Mahamaya, and she delivered to Pradyumna the specific energetic power in order to defeat the mystic powers of the Shambhara demon. Thus, being empowered by his wife, Pradyumna immediately went before Shambhara and challenged him to a fight. Pradyumna began to address him in very strong language so that his temper might be agitated and he would be moved to fight. It's very, like I was saying from the last story, with like Rukmini, it's a very Kshatriya thing, they kind of like insult each other with words. And, even when I was living in the Gambia, and I would go out and I'd watch these traditional Senegalese wrestling. It was a very old tradition of the warrior wrestlers would wear amulets, and they would do the same thing. They would be like sitting there kind of insulting each other before to get each other really mad and worked up so they could wrestle each other. It was actually pretty cool. At Pradyumna's words, the demon Shambhara, being insulted, felt just like a snake feels after being struck by one's leg. A serpent cannot tolerate being kicked by another animal or by a man, and he immediately bites the opponent. Shambhara felt the word of Pradyumna as if they were a kick. He immediately took up his club in his hand and appeared before Pradyumna to fight. In great anger, he began to beat Pradyumna with his club, just as a thunderbolt beats a mountain. The demon was also groaning and making a noise like a thundering cloud. Pradyumna protected himself with his own club, and eventually he struck the demon very severely. In this way, the fighting between Shambhasura and Pradyumna began very seriously. But Shambhasura knew the art of mystic powers and could raise himself in the sky and fight from outer space. So these demons, it's a very Vedic time, of course, the demons were very much attracted to materialistic wealth, women, wine, whatever, and also the mystic powers, as we can see from many stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Hiranyakashipu, of course, did Ravana had, there's some other stories that are coming up here. Banasura, it's definitely who all worship Lord Shiva for certain kinds of mystic powers. So he has mystic powers that can make him fly around in space. It's sort of like a thing. People we're thinking so much about how we're going to do space flight. But the yogis have been able to do this for millenniums, travel in their astral body into outer space, into other places. It's not a very great thing, it seems like a very exciting thing, but compared to love for Krishna, bhakti yoga, it's such a waste of time to even engage in these kinds of mystic powers, because they're also temporary, just like the material things that we aspire for. You may have very, very many powers, but ultimately death defeats you. He thus raised himself. Okay, there was another demon of the name Maya, and Shambhasura learned many mystic powers from him. He thus raised himself high in the sky and began to throw various types of nuclear weapons at the body of Pradyumna. Yes, so yes, not only did they have mystic powers, but they also had these things escaping the names of me right now, but the brahmastras, they were actually weapons. Nowadays we have nuclear weapons, but we also had them there in the Vedic tradition. They also had fire weapons and water weapons and things that were basically instilled by mystic powers and mantras. Actually, you could attach these brahmastras to your bow and arrow and say these mantras, and it would have these mystic powers that would, you shoot it, it would be like a nuclear weapon, or it would be like a huge tornado, or like water. A lot of these things have been lost. So, modern science thinks that they're so advanced, but actually the Vedic civilization thought of all these things and much, much more before, way before Europe came up with the Age of Enlightenment. That's a whole nother story, how advanced the Vedic civilization was. In order to combat the mystic powers of Shambhasura, Pradyumna remembered another mystic power known as Mahavidya, which was different from the black mystic power. The Mahavidya mystic power is based on the quality of goodness. Understanding that his enemy was formidable, Shambhara took assistance from various kinds of demoniac mystic powers belonging to the Guyakas, the Gandharvas, the Pishakas, and the snakes and the Rakshasas. So a lot of these different kinds of heavenly planets or hellish planets, creatures. But although the demon exhibited his mystic powers and took shelter of supernatural strength, Pradyumna was able to counteract his strength and powers by the superior power of Mahavidya. So these ideas, there are a lot of like animistic kind of ideas that goes around the world. Many I've seen actually traveling through Africa and different places, the Philippines and whatnot. People who are able to engage in black mystic powers, they do shape shifting, they go into trance and are possessed by spirits and whatnot. These are all kinds of, very subtle mystic powers. They refer to them as supernatural, but they're actually just subtle beings that are existing in different dimensions. So those kind of things, ghosts and all those kind of things, they're very real. They're very real. But here they're shown as a very scientific kind of explanation of what they are. They're not supernatural. They're subtle beings. They're living entities. They're in the material dimension, albeit subtle material dimension. When Shambhasura was defeated in every respect, Pradyumna then took his sharpened sword and immediately cut off the demon's head, which was decorated with a helmet and with valuable jewels. When Pradyumna thus killed the demon, all the demigods in the higher planetary systems began to shower flowers on him. Pradyumna's wife, Mayavati, could travel in outer space, and therefore they directly reached his father's capital, Dwarka, by the airways. They passed above the palace of Lord Krishna and began to come down as a cloud comes down with lightning. The intersection of the palace was known as Antapura, private apartments. Pradyumna and Mayavati could see that there were many women there, and they sat down among them. When the women saw Pradyumna dressed in bluish garments with very long hair, very long arms, curling hair, beautiful eyes, and smiley, reddish face, jewelry and ornaments, they first of all could not recognize him as Pradyumna, a personality different from Krishna. They all felt themselves to be very much blessed by the sudden presence of Krishna, and they wanted to hide in different corners of the palace. So they were like, oh, Krishna's here, because he looked very much like Krishna. When the women saw, however, that all the characteristics of Krishna were not present in the personality of Pradyumna, so they could see that, well, it was very much looking like Krishna, but you could tell they were not complete like Krishna. Out of curiosity, they came back again to see him and his wife Mayavati. All of them were conjecturing as to who he was, for he was so beautiful. Among the women was Rukmini Devi, who was equally beautiful with her lotus-like eyes. Seeing Pradyumna, she naturally remembered her own son, and milk began to flow from her breast out of motherly affection. She then began to wonder, who is this beautiful young boy? He appears to be the most beautiful person. So this is a wonderful kind of like connection that is very almost kind of mystical, that the mother has with the bond with the child. You know, another argument for life, right? That just by seeing their child, but by holding the child, the breast milk is being produced in the body of the mother. Who is that? She begins to wonder, who is that beautiful young boy? He appears to be the most beautiful person. Who is the fortunate young woman able to give birth to this nice boy in her womb and become his mother? And who is that young woman who has accompanied him? How have they met? Remembering my own son, who was stolen even from the maternity home, I can only guess that if he is living somewhere, he might have grown by this time to be like this boy. Simply by intuition, Rukmini could understand that Pradyumna was her own lost son. She could also observe that Pradyumna resembled Lord Krishna in every respect. She was struck with wonder as to how he acquired all the symptoms of Krishna. She therefore began to think more confidentially that the boy must be her own grown-up son, because she felt much affection for him, and as an auspicious sign her left arm was trembling. At that very moment, Lord Krishna, along with his father and mother, Devaki and Vasudeva, appeared on the scene. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, could understand everything, yet in that situation he remained silent. He's got a thing to play out here, you know. However, by the desire of Lord Sri Krishna, the great sage Narada also appeared on the scene, and he began to disclose all the incidents, how Pradyumna had been stolen from the maternity home, and how he had grown up, and how he'd come there with his wife Mayavati, who formerly had been Rati, the wife of Cupid. When everyone was informed of the mysterious disappearance of Pradyumna and how he had grown up, they all became struck with wonder, and because they had gotten back their dead son after they were almost hopeless of his return. When they understood that it was Pradyumna who was present, they began to receive him with great delight. One after another, all the members of the family, Devaki, Vasudeva, Lord Sri Krishna, Lord Balaram, and Rukmini, and all the women of the family began to embrace both Pradyumna and his wife Mayavati. When the news of Pradyumna's return was spread all over the city of Dwarka, all the astonished citizens began to come with great anxiety to see the lost Pradyumna. They began to say, the dead son has come back. What can be more pleasing than this? And I think it's just really wonderful because Krishna always knows these things because it's his arrangement by why all these things are happening. But he allows his devotees to engage in service to him, gives them the wonderful opportunity to be able, like Narada, his service is to basically go around and spread the glories of Krishna. And here he was able to lay out this pastime and why it happened, and just by the arrangement of Krishna. Krishna didn't say, oh yeah, well I know what happened. He just, he was silent. And he let Narada Muni know, okay, you can come in and explain everything to all of us, and we can pay our respects to you, as is fitting a pure devotee of Krishna. Just so wonderful. Srila Shukadeva Goswami has explained that in the beginning, all the residents of the palace, who were all mothers and stepmothers of Pradyumna, mistook him to be Krishna and were all bashful, infected by the desire of conjugal love. The explanation is that Pradyumna's personal appearance is exactly like Krishna's, and he was factually Cupid himself. There was no cause of astonishment, therefore, when the mothers of Pradyumna and other women mistook him in that way. It is clear that from the statement that Pradyumna's bodily characteristics were so similar to Krishna's that he was mistaken to be Krishna even by his mother. It's amazing. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 54th chapter of Krishna, Pradyumna, born to Krishna and Rukmini. And that is halfway through our book, the Krishna book, because it says thus ends volume 1. I think there's 3 volumes actually of Krishna, the Krishna book, but we are about halfway through. And so next volume we're going to read a wonderful story about the Shamataka jewel, which is a great story if you know that. And so I look forward to telling you that story next. And now we're just going to chant and finish out today. Thank you very much. Haribol. Haribol. Haribol, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember to comment in the comment section below. And there's a whole plethora of Krishna videos there to watch. Please take time to watch the videos, comment on them, and share them with your friends. And we'll see you next time. Namaste.